Hello, everyone. I'm Asha Nayaswami, and we're here doing our fireside chats. I always have to stop and remember, here we are. Where am I? What am I doing? I'm at home every day like everyone else who is at home every day. There's just gets to be a certain wonderful sameness to it. It's quite an interesting experience. So everyone, let's start with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master, Paramhansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, Divine Friend Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to you all. Awaken within us our own natural understanding of divine law, of divine love, of our true destiny in this life, which is to expand our awareness and come to know Thee. Om, peace. Amen. I've been doing a series this week, and we're still in it. It's called On These Principles We Stand, or These Are the Principles on Which We Stand. And it comes from 1974 out of the Light Bearer book, when Swami Kriyananda listed out 6 principles that were the defining characteristics of Ananda communities. At the time, as I've been explaining, there were a lot of different communities being formed around the country and around the world. And Swamiji was trying to describe in a few simple words, as he always does, just sort of what made us different. So far we've talked about simplicity, compassion for the world, and practicality. And today our subject is service, not self-indulgence. And in certain ways, once a culture is well established, it seems obvious that that's what it's about. But before it's there, before it's brought down from the ether, just many different possibilities are there. And in the 70s, especially when this was written, and when Swami was really trying to gather together what at that time was almost entirely young Americans, he was having to form from many different energies going in many different directions, enormous cultural influences, and also him bringing this teaching of Master from India, of true Sanatana Dharma. And there was absolutely no context. He had to explain it all. And a great deal of what was happening in the 70s with myself and my cohorts in this, we were for the most part white, we were for the most part privileged, we were for the most part either potentially highly educated or actually highly educated. I dropped out of college. A number of people there finished college, but many of us were dropouts. But it was that point in the cultural history, which I know is now actually history. It's really odd when your life becomes history. But it was a cultural moment in which we were repudiating a tremendous amount of what was the accepted expectation for us in society as a whole. And some of that was noble. Some of that was really seeking a more meaningful way of life. There was a tremendous agitation against the war in Vietnam. There was a taking down of dogmatic approaches to life. But there was also a tremendous amount of it that was really quite self-indulgent. And it wasn't self-indulgent necessarily in a negative way. I mean, for example, the sexual revolution, as it was called at that time, was happening, where people were just much more free in their sexual expression than had been common prior to that time, and much of traditional morality was just being dismantled, not necessarily to anybody's good, but nonetheless it was being dismantled. It was being fueled by psychedelic drugs and by marijuana and just a whole we can do what we want way of life. We don't have to do what you say, we can do what we want. And Swami Kriyananda was from a very traditional, the spiritual teaching of Sanatana Dharma is very pure. And he was himself a monk. And it was a very uplifted teaching. Also was from a completely other generation. And a great deal of what we were doing was exceedingly, it wasn't part of his own reality, but he was broad in his understanding. It wasn't hard for him to understand it, but he had to thread the path through all of us. I remember an early satsang where someone said to him, "What do you think of the sexual revolution?" And expecting some kind of a lecture about traditional morality and sort of up for the fight. Swami's response says, "Well, overall," he said, "I think it's a good idea," which of course was not anything anybody expected to hear. And his response was, because people are making their own experience the criteria for their decision making in life. And he said, eventually in life, we have to learn from experience. We cannot merely follow a path because someone else thinks it's a good idea and told us it was a good idea. We must make it our own. Truth springs from inside of us. It cannot be assumed from the outside. So having said that and sort of won us to his point of view, he said, provided, provided that you're honest about your experience and don't simply become committed to a new dogma and then therefore either deny your own experience or reinterpret it so that it fits your new dogma. He said truth has to be the criteria for everything. So if we're going to make our own experience our criteria for the decision making in our life, we have to be honest enough and wise enough and aware enough to be able to actually tell what the consequences of our behavior are. Because many things that gradually become dogma in religion did not start out as dogma. They started out as revelation. They started out as an actual perception by an elevated soul, a saintly soul, or a God-realized master of the way that we are made and those actions and attitudes which will bring us the fulfillment we seek. And later it becomes you're going to go to hell if you don't do it. But it's not that you're going to go to hell if you behave a certain way. It's that you will find yourself in hell if you behave a certain way. And it's not that anybody did it to you, it's that we do it to ourselves. And so there was a repudiation of self-sacrifice. There was a repudiation of delayed gratification. There was a repudiation of anything that didn't feel good. In fact, we used to joke a lot. One of the most popular spirituals teachers of the time, so-called spiritual, I'll put it in quotes, but he fooled a lot of people. And he was very, very popular. One of my friends characterized it. Of course he's popular. He says, just do whatever you feel like doing and just call it spiritual. So you got to be satisfied on all sides. You got to be a libertine, a hedonist, and a self-indulgent person, and you just declared that all that was spiritual. Because if it feels good, it must be spiritual. And that was sort of what was happening, which was better than if it feels horrible, it must be spiritual. Because we were moving out of what Swami later characterized in the Festival of Light, whereas in the past, suffering and sorrow were the coin of man's redemption. For us now, that payment has been exchanged for calm acceptance and joy. So we were and have moved out of a suffering is the only way to please God into a why would he want us to suffer? But then we have to understand that much suffering comes from our own wrong action, and God does not want us to suffer. But that doesn't mean that we can just make up truth. And because we make it up and declare it, that it's so. So in the context of Ananda, a lot of people who came to Ananda and even lived for many years had the thought in their mind that they were there to find a way of life that they would enjoy. And that any kind of structure and any kind of discipline, any kind of we need to pay the rent and therefore we need to work was sort of like should be repudiated as a false teaching. Because if it feels good, it must be right. And our gardener, this gentleman named Hanel Cassidy, who moved to Ananda. He seemed terribly old to us, but he was probably 60 when he came to Ananda. Swami Kriyananda invited him to move there, and he happened to be actually a global expert in biodynamic organic gardening. And he came there, Swami invited him there to meditate, to spend his later years in meditation. But Hanno looked at us out there, I was never in the garden. You built buildings, you went to grow food or you cook the food. And I went in to cook the food, so I never learned to grow it. That was about all that was going on at that time. And he just looked at us and he realized we were never going to have a carrot that we'd grown ourselves unless he took a hand in it. And he was very disciplined. 7 a.m. every morning, he was standing in the garden. He expected the other gardeners to be there, very exact. And he just complained to Swami. He said, as soon as they, feel like it, they just go off to the river and go swimming. They have no discipline. They have no focus. And it got to be sort of a joke. Krishna is calling me to the river. And they would just leave the garden regardless of whether the plants needed water or anything. So the whole idea, it wasn't that people thought they were being selfish. They actually thought they were being spiritual by just following the flow like this. And marijuana didn't help because marijuana kind of saps your willpower. It was a strict rule of our community, absolutely, that you could not use drugs on or off the property. It was like we were not a drug community. It was very important that absolutely not. But many people had that in their background. And the main characteristic of marijuana, I mean, we have it all over our culture now. It saps your willpower because it makes you feel like you're having a great experience without putting out any energy. Everything becomes colorful and interesting. I mean, I'm speaking from a minimal experience of 50 years ago, but I remember it, and I remember the world around us. You just think something has happened when nothing has happened. So it gradually, why should I work so hard? I can just make myself feel good without effort. So all of that, I'm just running all of this because all of that was very important in what Swamiji was trying to get us to understand, which is that the real fulfillment that we were looking for was from disciplined, high energy put out in the name of helping others. And of course, a lot of people who came to Ananda, the majority of people, and everyone who stayed, had that as an inner desire. When I met Swami Kriyananda at Stanford in November of 1969, above all, what I wanted in my life was I wanted to be able to serve. I wanted to be able to do something for the world and for other people. And my enormous frustration was that I couldn't find a cause that I believed in. And I had discovered by then the path of self-realization and the ideal of meditation, but I was still a little confused. Plus, I was just still getting up, going to work, and I had just some meaningless job. I don't know what I was doing at the time, but it meant nothing to me. I remember, eventually I ended up working as a secretary in legal offices. God knows why I ended up there, but that's where I ended up. I got fired from one job. I got fired from one job because the personnel director could tell I have to just use the exact words, that I didn't give a damn. and, and it was like, of course I don't. Why would I? Why would I care about this? This means nothing to me. It wasn't until I was much older and more mature that I realized, of course you have to care about your work. It's just terrible to live if you don't really care about what you're doing. So much of your time and energy is not meaningful to you. Now, I mean, I know I'm saying that to a lot of people who care about their families and therefore care about their work. I've mellowed. But I desperately wanted to care about what I was doing. And so when I met Swami, and not only did he have a place where I could live, which was a community, but he also ran a retreat. And the retreat for the public was integral to the community. So we weren't only building a life for ourselves, but everything we learned, we were turning and giving to the world. Not that anybody cared, but the people who did come, and gradually it became quite expansive, I was absolutely thrilled just because of my own past lives as a yogi. Self-indulgence really was not cutting it for me. It was just taking care of myself was actually like already hell. It was just as simple as that. I cannot just keep working for myself. But what can I give myself to? So I met Swami, I came to Ananda, I moved to the community, I began to serve him. I cooked. I was put away right away cooking. And I was a super intellectual person. And then I was cooking. And it was I cooked 3 meals a day. At that point, much of the community was still at the meditation retreat, and nobody had, or very few people had their own kitchens. Nobody could shop. It was so we all took our meals together, and it was a communal kitchen. So 6 days a week, I cooked 3 meals a day for like 40 people, and on the seventh day, I drove this big pickup truck into town and loaded up enough food. I did laundry. I did 30 loads of laundry for everybody who lived there. I filled the truck up with all the food I needed for the next 6 days and drove this big truck back to the community. And I had one assistant who was semi competent, and all the rest of it I did myself. I was absolutely over the top busy. All I could ever think about was what I was doing, and I had never been so happy. Never. And one of the reasons I realized I was so happy is there was no time to indulge myself. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I mean, think about it. It's just there's your time span. And you just finish one, you start the next, you finish that, you start the next. But it was so wonderful. And when I first discovered the spiritual path in a book by Vivekananda, one of the things he said in the book was, don't think about yourself and you'll be happy. And I remember at the time thinking, well, what else is there to think about except myself? And not selfishly, because I wasn't selfish by nature, but I was always aware of how I fit in or didn't fit in or whatever it was. There was always a tape going. What about me? What about me? What about me? What about me? Hey, what about me? What about me? And I was always kind of like moving through life trying to have the most fun. I would say I was looking for my own advantage, but I wasn't selfish. I was just looking for fun. I was looking to be uplifted and be happy. All of a sudden, there was just simply no time. There was no opportunity because people needed to eat. And it was so concrete and it was so um, just uncomplicated. You just cooked it, you served it to them. Some meals were better than others, but somebody always liked it. And you fed them. They were happy that they were fed. You took the dirty dishes back, you washed them, and you just did the whole thing again. There was no big existential question to solve or a question of meaning. Everybody had to eat. And I could help them. And of course, gradually, I expanded from there into more subtle levels of I could help them. But what I discovered was that by not indulging myself, oddly enough, I pleased myself on a level that I didn't know was possible. And it's fundamental to the spiritual path. Service, not self-indulgence. That's how we overcome the ego. Now, we've talked about, Master's path is not extreme. When I was talking about the principle of simplicity, I was contrasting the way Master taught us compared to the way St. Francis had to live and the way he had to make his monks live, where, lack of self-indulgence went all the way to, barefoot in the snow and just eating the food that you held out your begging bowl and that's all you got. So Master made a point of that we're not impoverished. We live simply, but we're not impoverished. But nonetheless, that doesn't mean that the transcendence of the desire to indulge oneself is less absolute. And physical is the smallest way. I mean, it's also just indulging our moods and our preferences and our petty grievances and our insecurities. Now, there's a difference between facing courageously and 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 in a practical way, you see how it all comes together. And in a practical way, figuring out how I'm going to train myself and discipline myself to rise to a higher level, that's different than self-indulgence. Self-indulgence says, why should I even try? But there gets to be a fine line where we indulge our moods and we indulge our hurts and resentments. And the most powerful way out of that is actually service. Selfless service is one of the most powerful ways to overcome the ego. That's why seva, karma yoga, if you have an active temperament and you use that active temperament to help others. In the course of this shelter in place time, I was requested to record a 1-minute little video, my suggestions for how have I coped with being in shelter in place like this. And I said, well, what I've been doing is what I am doing right this minute, which is I've been going onto the internet every day, sometimes several times a day, almost every day, sometimes more than one time a day, just talking to people. It's interesting, I'd originally thought, well, I have a book project I'd like to work on. I would like to edit some of my talks into, they've already been, the preliminary, not more than preliminary, they've already been edited, but I need to refine them so I can publish them as a book. Haven't yet, except just a little bit, gotten into that. But I realized, but it's been taken over by all this broadcasting. But I realized, well, this is the need of the moment. Even if I spent all this time on a book, it'd be months before anybody ever sees it. And this is the need of the moment. So I've been doing this. So in my 1-minute thing, I said, well, I've been doing the things that are natural to me, which is talking over the internet a lot. Then I spent several weeks sewing what turned out to be hundreds of cloth masks, to arm our community and our families and even some of our neighborhood. I said, but if I couldn't do any of those things, and I just started listing, I would make a cookie. I would start a cookie factory. I would make chocolate chip cookies for everyone, or I knew how to bake bread. Maybe I'd make fresh homemade bread for everyone, or I'd find out who in the community was really lonely, and I would try to find a way to go visit them. I'd call seniors on the phone and see if I could make audio recordings of their favorite books, or read them to them over the telephone, or just talk to them on the phone every day, or mow people's lawns. In other words, serve. Because if you don't think about yourself, you'll be happy. And if we identify ourselves with a greater reality. Master has a very interesting Whispers from Eternity poem. It's very simple. Lord, teach me to find as much joy in spending for the sake of others as I do in spending for myself. And it's a really interesting template to apply. Would I really? Could I just as easily spend $500 on this beautiful coat for you as I would do it for me? And why not? Now, we go back to simplicity. Master doesn't demand that we have nothing for ourselves. We may also be impersonally, we may take care of ourselves in an impersonal way. But are we always more important than the people around us? And aren't we all just children of God? And doesn't God equally take care of all of us? So it isn't merely that the world needs us to help it. It's that we need a way to identify with a greater reality and to experience it. This is how we grow spiritually, when we realize that it really is more joyful to give than to receive. We are, in the Bible, it says, it's more blessed to give than receive. Swamiji says that translation is slightly misleading, because what it means is it's more blissful to give. Because blessing is not God giving us a gold star, just saying, you're a good girl. Or as one of my friends who went to Catholic school as a child, when he was 6, he was very rebellious and didn't like anything that was going on. And the nun said to him, if you're a good boy, you'll have a bigger house in heaven. And he said, he was so happy the nun said that to him, because he didn't care if he had a bigger house in heaven, and therefore he didn't have to be good. It just liberated him from the whole appalling system he felt himself trapped in. It was pointless. That's not the kind of blessing we get. And the blessing we get is not that we get more self-indulgent. The blessing we get is that what makes us miserable is our limited self-identification and the incredible insecurity that that creates in us. Being alone in this world is terrifying. And I don't just mean not having friends. I mean the idea that I am a self-contained entity and that everything around me is potentially a threat to my well-being. I know that's how people live, and I fall into it. Everybody falls into it. That is our hell. When I didn't know what I was looking for as a child, but I knew I was really looking for something. And the closest I came when I was in my early teens was that I thought raising children was an honorable profession, and it was true and necessary. It wasn't superfluous. So much of what I saw in the world seemed superfluous to me. Raising children was an honorable and true profession. So I decided I would have children. I would have a bunch of children, 10, 12. I've never even been pregnant, so it didn't exactly work out that way. But I would have a bunch of children. Oddly enough, I didn't think so much about being a school teacher, although I think I always thought in the back of my mind I would end up also teaching children. But when I discovered the path of self-realization, I realized what I wanted was to expand my consciousness, expand my self-definition. And all I could think of was to multiply physically. That if I had 12 children, somehow that would expand my consciousness. But I realized it wouldn't necessarily do it at all. I'd just be one person with 12 children. What I really wanted to do is I wanted to break the bondage of limited self-identification. And service to others is the way we begin to realize that when I give to others, that is who I am. And it was very interesting in that very early first couple of years when I was doing all that cooking. It wasn't merely that I didn't have time to indulge myself. I forgot myself. I mean, I just forgot I was there. Sometimes people would say, "How are you?" And it would startle me because there would be somebody like thinking about me. And I just didn't have time to think about me. I was just too busy. And gradually I've come to understand on a very profound level that self-realization is actual total self-forgetfulness, small s self-forgetfulness, that we simply are not what we think we are. And service is the most powerful way that we begin to see that, because our energy directed always to the welfare of others, we begin to feel so blissful in that the little one that was me, it's not a sacrifice to sacrifice it. And that's the great secret that all yogis know and all great saints know. Um, I think Swami had a conversation with Ananda, um, the blissful mother described in Autobiography of a Yogi. And he said something to her about, "You're so generous with your time. You give so much to so many." And Ma looked at him and said, "Oh, is that how you see it?" Which was a very interesting answer. You're seeing me as a separate entity who's giving of myself to others. That's not how she saw it. She was everyone. There was no one self giving to another self. She was just living in the reality of the oneness of all and responding accordingly. You see, that's where Seva takes you. And then it becomes self-liberating on a level that the selfish-minded, the self-indulgent person can't even imagine. So we have made a community. We have made a gorgeous community. We've made multiple communities. It's a wonderful life. It's an absolutely wonderful life. I can't imagine any other way of living, and I look forward to the day when this idea, as Master said, spreads like wildfire, and we're all living in these beautiful communities together. But the secret of the beauty of them is that we're all there for each other. We're not there for ourselves. And the blissfulness of it is more blessed to give and to serve than it is to receive. And that becomes the secret of our success. God bless you.